At Five Star Bank, community is at the heart of what we do. Every day we strive to have thoughtful solutions for our customers and help our communities prosper. Honest dialogue about the issues affecting the region is vitally important to that prosperity. We are proud to be part of the conversation and hope you'll join in.
January 17, 1989 started as an uneventful day in Stockton. Then a disturbed man walked onto the campus of Cleveland Elementary School and murdered 5 school children and wounded many more before taking his own life. The Stockton schoolyard shooting was in its own way a turning point in our nation's history. Many of us felt that one of society's assumed havens of safety, our children's schools, had been violated and would never be the same. Joining us today in partnership with the American Leadership Forum are Roseville's Police Chief Daniel Hahn and Stu Van Aersdale, whose account of the tragedy 25 years later appears in Sacktown magazine. Why this story now?
Well, this story now because we've seen this cycle kind of initiated by Stockton reoccur many times over the last 25 years, most recently, most galvanizingly in Newtown, Connecticut with the Sandy Hook shooting. And that anniversary, that 1-year anniversary just passed, and we thought, how do these communities heal? How do they recover? What changes in a community? And Stockton, 25 years later, I mean, the generation that experienced this shooting then is now raising children of their own. And so we wanted to kind of look at this as a case study of how a community recovers, how victims recover, and what's next.
The impression on society, though, has been something that has really changed not only our conversations, but also how it is that our children experience the world. I want to read you both something very quickly. This was in yesterday's LA Times. We did the math, we did the reading, we had a lockdown. The bolder 4th grader replied. The teacher froze. When pressed, the boy matter-of-factly explained the protocol he had rehearsed since kindergarten. We hid so in case a man with a gun came, he couldn't find us. Chief, that is a kindergartner. What has happened in terms of the way that our kids interact with the world?
Yeah, I think in this and in many other ways, innocence has been lost. And for that lockdown is a great example. We advise schools that they should practice lockdown just as much as they do fire drills, because the reality is they're more likely to have to go through a legitimate lockdown than they will the school burning down.
It's fascinating to me. When I was a child, the big deal was nuclear war. And so we used to do this thing called duck and cover. And is lockdown like the 21st century equivalent of duck and cover?
I think it might be, actually. In fact, one of the anecdotes that comes up in the story that I wrote for Sacktown has to do with a teacher who was present at the Stockton schoolyard shooting, and she was in lockdown that day. There was no protocol for that. There was no rehearsal for that. They didn't know what to do. They just kept the class locked down. Then, years later, she was doing a lesson on telling time. And she asked her students, what can you do in 5 seconds? And one of them stood up, a 7-year-old stood up and said, you can pop a clip in 5 seconds.
What?
And so this
really?
Yes, and her story was that this is the way students are coming to school now. This is the experience they have. And yes, innocence is absolutely
lost. You can
lost.
pop a clip in 5 seconds.
That's the anecdote that was related to me.
Now I got to tell you, my reaction is that's society, that's the changes that have taken place, but it always brings me back to, you know, what's happened in pop culture between video games and movies and television. For a child of that age to have that sort of awareness, where does that come from?
It comes from everywhere in our society right now. Every time you turn around, you'll either see it on TV, on a video, in real life. There's a lot of neighborhoods that see a lot of things that they shouldn't have to see. But in terms of back to the lockdowns, there's a lot of times we want them to practice lockdowns, not just because somebody might come onto campus, but things going on in the neighborhood. Officers might be chasing somebody, and just to make sure that if that person runs onto campus as they're trying to get away or something, the kids are safe. So there's a lot of reasons for doing the lockdown. But yeah, I never practiced lockdowns when I was a kid.
Right. Tell us about the victims. Who were these children, and tell us about their families today.
Well, many of the children who were wounded, in fact, at the time, Cleveland Elementary School was predominantly Southeast Asian and Hispanic. And
kind of a precursor for the California of the 21st century.
Correct, yes. There was a significant Southeast Asian population in Stockton at the time, and many of them had escaped the Khmer Rouge regime and the genocide of Cambodia.
Cambodia,
yes,
right.
exactly. And I believe the number was 18 of the victims who were actually wounded and or killed. 4 of the dead were Cambodian, one of them was Vietnamese. And so there was a number of hurdles to clear in order to kind of recover. There was the language barrier. There was that just kind of the tightness of that community. You know, they kind of just closed ranks around the victims and the families and decided to just kind of, you know, just hold out as long as they could as a community. And there was a lot of outreach, and there was a lot of stigmatization to mental health at the time.
Really?
Too. Among Cambodians, yes, they looked at it as a sign of weakness, which is still a stigma that we have in the United States today among, you know, all ethnicities, I believe. And it's getting better, but at the time, the stigma was that we can't show weakness. This community can't show weakness. We've come all this way. And it was almost, well, not almost, totally mind-boggling that a community that had been subject to such tragedy overseas could experience such an unprecedented tragedy here in America.
Well, this one of the things that you raise, because the primary population affected were Southeast Asian, particularly Cambodian, and I think there was one Vietnamese victim as well. The fact that today no one really talks about the Stockton shootings the way that they talk about Columbine or Aurora, and we just recently had another incident that took place in Colorado as well. What role does the fact that this is an insular community, a immigrant community, play in the fact that this shooting, which really was the first of these horrible events that really captivated the nation, has been forgotten about?
I don't think it plays as much of a role as the proliferation of mass media in the intervening period. So, you know, at the time, that was the dawn of cable news. CNN had been around for almost a decade by that time, and it was the first school shooting, mass school shooting, well, ever in America, but it was certainly the first mass school shooting in the cable news era, the 24-hour news cycle. And so that was also a learning curve too, that I think the media was trying to figure out, how do we cover this? And anyone who was there will tell you that there was a swarm of media, international and national.
People, even celebrities like Michael Jackson showed up for, you know, to this thing.
Yes, right? Michael Jackson made kind of a morale boosting trip to Cleveland Elementary in February, just a few weeks after the shooting.
And Chief, one of the questions that always comes up is maybe the lack of coverage prior to, you know, this proliferation of the 24-hour news cycle was a good thing, because does the fact that these events, you know, hit the national consciousness time and time again actually encourage this sort of behavior among people who want to do harm?
Yeah, I think there's a positive and a negative to all the media coverage that we have now. One, it brings awareness. That's a good thing. But there is a negative side to it. It does glorify it. We always worry about copycats and things like that on the anniversary dates. But I couldn't agree more that when the Stockton shooting happened, the media wasn't quite the way it is now or the way it was when Columbine happened. And the other thing is, Columbine is really the one school incident that really changed the way law enforcement deals with these sort of things. Prior to Columbine, law enforcement typically the patrol officers would respond and seal off the area and wait for the trained SWAT officers to go in and capture the person that's a danger. What we saw in Columbine, if you do that, the person continues shooting people. And so it completely changed the way law enforcement operates in those situations. And I think this last one, last week, you can see that the school resource officer that was on that campus did not wait, did not seal off hallways, did not evacuate. He went right at the source. And I think that might be a large reason why it was contained to this relatively small area that it was. But before Columbine, that's not the way we operated.
And in your community, have those sorts of events changed the nature of the relationship that your force has with the school district?
Oh, absolutely. We have officers on all of our high school campuses, and we train on the high school campuses now, not just with SWAT, but patrol officers, because those are the ones that are responding. And the way law enforcement responds now is the patrol officers are going in towards the threat. They're not waiting outside anymore. So we want our officers to be aware of the campus setup, and we want us to have relationships with the school sites, and so everybody knows what they need to do. The other thing is, when you're dealing with schools, you're dealing with families' most precious thing that they have.
Oh, of course.
And so you can only imagine how you would react, how I would react if my baby is inside that school. Well, most likely, nobody can protect my baby the way I can.
No.
And so my first instinct is to go into that campus and get my child. And that is probably one of the worst things that can happen.
Really?
So if we don't have processes and setup for parents to get information and to go to a location to reunite with their kids and remove kids that are okay and get them reunited with their parents, that's what we're going to deal with. So that's another thing we've learned over the years.
Stu, tell us a little bit about the gunman. Who was Patrick Purdy?
Patrick Purdy was a 24-year-old vagabond, pretty much. He attended Cleveland Elementary School from, I believe, first to third grade, or when he was younger, he went to Cleveland Elementary School, and so he had a connection to the school. He eventually moved to Sacramento with his mother, and he was really just beset with mental illness and abuse. He had a very abusive relationship with his mother in particular, according to a report released by the Attorney General in October of 1989. And long story short, he just was never really given the care that he needed. And he had numerous run-ins with the law.
That's the thing that's so fascinating, is that this guy had so many interactions with law enforcement, and we're like, why didn't anyone intervene?
Well, I think what happened was that he had actually stayed out of trouble once he became an adult. As a juvenile, he was incarcerated numerous times, but he was never convicted of a felony as an adult. Therefore, he was able to, A, acquire weapons,
right,
and B, he was not necessarily seen as the type of threat that he would eventually become, at least not in a law enforcement setting. If you look at the mental health records and his intake records of, from agencies from San Joaquin County to Sacramento, they all said he is a significant threat, mostly to other people, not just to himself. And those were private records. Those could not be shared. And even today, there's HIPAA laws that actually prevent medical professionals from sharing those types of records with law enforcement.
Chief, is it the same today,
Yeah.
by and large?
Yeah, I mean, a lot of it depends on, are they an immediate threat? Can they pose a threat right now, or is it just in general? And a lot of the school shootings you see, like the one recently last week, I've read in the news that the friends of his said they would have never guessed he would have done something like this. So there's a lot of times where who knew they were going to do it? But I can also tell you that with officers on campus, our officers and most officers that work campuses are not just there to be police officers. They're really there to be part of the staff and build relationships with the kids, because our goal is to get kids educated. Now, granted, a large part of that is safety and security of the campus. But when they build relationships, oftentimes kids will come to them and tell them things.
Really?
So it's not unheard of for our officers and officers in other jurisdictions to have a kid come to them and say, such and such has a gun, or such and such has access to a gun. And we follow up on that, and we find the gun, and we deal with it. So a lot of that is more on the prevention side, that who knows what that could prevent when you catch those sort of things.
Well, the whole issue, though, of mental health treatment and the safety net to catch these folks, Obviously, the children having a good relationship with the officers on campus is important, but in fact, when these types of tells are around, and you have the situation back at Newtown, where those who are pro-gun say, well, look, he couldn't buy a gun, so he had to go get his mother's after he killed her. But at the same time, from all of the news reports, a reasonable mind would have concluded that this kid really needed some intervention.
He absolutely needed intervention, and there was, or were, numerous reports and numerous, just speculations, from people who knew him that he was a time bomb. And if you read the report that came out from the Attorney General, the state attorney, I should say, in Connecticut, came out recently about the Sandy Hook shooting, Adam Lanza, there were so many red flags, and it really, really recalled to me the red flags around Patrick Birdie.
Yes, exactly. Yeah. And that's really where I'm going with this is, do you feel comfortable that the state, that government has put, and the private sector working with it, has in place today what we need to better identify and intervene on individuals that present these types of warning signs?
Well, I think we can always get better. The challenge is, what do you do? So when somebody says this person could potentially be a danger, what do you do with that person? Do you lock them up in a jail because they really haven't committed a crime? That's the challenge of balancing the freedoms of our country with balancing safety, and that's not just a challenge in schools. It's a challenge in just about everything we do.
You almost sound like you're saying, well, what are you asking for us to have a Minority Report, that Tom Cruise movie, where you commit thought crime and so they arrest you prior to you actually doing it?
It's it's one thing to know about, somebody analyzed somebody and said they were a danger, but then what's the next step? What do you do about it?
I believe actually, pardon me, there recently Ted Gaines, a state senator from Roseville, there were a batch of new gun laws, or gun-related laws, firearms-related laws that passed, that the governor recently signed, and one of them was about any mental health practitioner who hears or encounters a threat made to a specific person must report that to authorities within 24 hours of hearing that threat. So that kind of breaks down a little bit of that wall between privacy and and rights, and it also opens the door a little bit more to prevention, firearm crime, firearm violence prevention, which I think is the real issue here, which is something that's been raised for 25 years now, since Stockton.
Well, in fact, a couple of the young victims of the Stockton shootings actually take very, very strong positions, being pro-gun and anti-gun control. What did they have to say?
One of them, Rob Young, is now a police officer in the Bay Area, and he has 2 children around the same age he was when he was shot, 8 and 6, I believe, and he is very, very pro-gun, and he had, he has every reassurance that the presence of guns prevents crime, that if there were more guns at schools or more armed officers at schools, that would prevent or at least deter school shootings.
And in fact, you have officers at all the high schools. So maybe you're a proof point for exactly that sort of position.
Yeah, I think the important thing to know, though, is no one thing will solve the whole issue. For example, the one last week, there was an armed officer at that school. It still happened at the school. Now, luckily, it seems like it contained it, so it didn't get larger, but it still occurred. Same with gun laws. So stricter gun laws might help in certain areas, but it won't eliminate the problem, because you might not be able to legally buy a gun, but I'm pretty sure you can find one somehow. So it's a lot of things working together. Same with a new law of notifying law enforcement when somebody poses a threat. When you get back to then what? So we go and talk, and there might be some laws violated. We might be able to arrest them, but they're going to get out of jail, and they're probably still going to have the same mental issues when they get out. So again, it comes back to what are the things we can do when we have these suspicions, when we have these issues cropping up with an individual? What do we do about it?
It's been shown that restraining orders actually protect, like they actually stop gun violence from happening, because when one of the biggest issues is domestic violence, and anyone who's been charged with or I guess convicted of a domestic violence crime, or someone who's had a restraining order against them in a domestic violence case is not permitted to own a gun. Is that
right?
Correct? Okay. So that's the kind of thing where again, chipping away
right.
at gun violence and preventing gun violence. How do we kind of find new ways? And so if someone says I'm like my wife or my girlfriend or the mother of my child, I'm going to go after her, and that's a specific threat, then that person can get a restraining order, and then the mental health professional can notify the police, of course. And so you have kind of a legal case there for preventing gun violence, a specific case of gun violence. Those will grow over time, and those will actually become kind of a surge that maybe mobilizes other means of prevention around the country.
Now, in talking about new legislative action and new initiatives, one of the fascinating things in your story was that 25 years later, the teachers came together and they've started an effort. And incidentally, one of the things that was pointed out about the difference between the Stockton shootings and the shootings that have happened since that time is the next day those teachers came back to work.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
At Newtown, I believe they're leveling the school. And
the school is leveled.
And starting over. Tell us about this new initiative with the teachers and why it got started.
Well, it's about 6 teachers who were at Cleveland School that day, are all now retired, and they formed a group called Cleveland School Remembers. And for years, they didn't know whether or not they should talk to each other about what happened that day at Cleveland School. They didn't know if they had any real grounds or traction that they could kind of build for preventing gun violence in the future, and especially school shootings. And then after Newtown, they decided that they had to do something. And of course, now that they're retired, they have more time to kind of focus on this type of activism. And so they have gone to bat just to try and initiate new laws and other legislation and activist causes to not only draw attention to the issue of gun violence, which is really all they feel they can do in such a, I guess, inhospitable climate for legal action. They do eventually hope to kind of, I guess, initiate new gun laws in California and abroad.
Right. The late writer Hannah Arendt, who wrote about Eichmann's trial post the end of World War II and his involvement in the Holocaust, coined a phrase called the banality of evil. And it's been interpreted many ways. But one of the ways, Chief, is that as evil continues to perpetuate itself, we as a society become somewhat inured to its effects, and we become kind of numbed. Are we, because of this succession of incidences like this, is the horror decreasing, and are we becoming more passive about this subject overall, despite the actions of folks like these teachers?
I think some of us are. In some corners we are. But I will say, in terms of schools and law enforcement and the people that directly impact campuses, I think they're very concerned about that and are doing a lot of things and implementing new procedures and processes to try to prevent these things the best they can. So I would say, to a certain extent, yes, but other people, no. They are trying to prevent these sort of things from happening on their individual campuses.
And what do you think that we as parents, you're so right about all of us saying, we think we can protect our children better than anyone else, and we would want to rush in to go get our babies. What should we as parents be doing to support your efforts and those of our schools in order to make sure that we're as well prepared as possible for this sort of circumstance?
I think just in general, be involved in our kids' education and talk to our kids about reporting things and not, falling into don't snitch and things like that. So if they see something or hear something, they should tell somebody, because you never know when that could be the one person on the one day that they do something tragic like that. So I think all of us need to be vigilant and pay attention to what catches our attention and do something about it.
And Stu, in our final moments, tell us a little bit about what's next for the survivors and the families. Are there any other efforts that they have going that they're going to be involved with?
The survivors and the families in Stockton?
Yes.
Well, I think on the whole, you're seeing that these survivors were so young when this happened, you know, and most of them have moved on. And whether it's Paul Tang, who is featured in the story, he's now a pharmacist in the South Bay. So he's moved on. He's married. He's going to start a family. And life is great, you know. And yes, he has a 12-inch scar around his right side, but life is good. Rob Young is a activist on behalf of, you know, gun rights and gun ownership rights, Second Amendment rights, and that's something he's passionate about.
So they've all moving on.
I think they're all moving on, and I think that's a specific case, though. In Newtown, there's no way to know, because of the proliferation of media and because of the way gun culture is now, there's no way to know if it's going to reflect the same phenomenon.
And we'll revisit it again.
Yes.
Thank you, gentlemen. Well, that's our show. Thanks to our guests, and thanks to you for watching Studio Sacramento. I'm Scott Syfax. See you next time right here on KVIE.
At Five Star Bank, community is at the heart of what we do. Every day we strive to have thoughtful solutions for our customers and help our communities prosper. Honest dialogue about the issues affecting the region is vitally important to that prosperity. We are proud to be part of the conversation and hope you'll join in.
All episodes of Studio Sacramento, along with other KVIE programs, are available to watch online at kvie.org/video.